In this video, we are going to have a look at the basics of a class. The basic class definition, as PHP.net says, it begins with a keyword class, followed by a class name, then followed by a pair of curly braces which enclose the definitions of the properties and methods belonging to the class. Then we have the class name can be any valid label, provided it is not a PHP reserved word. And if we open this one, there are quite a few of them. You have list of keywords. So if we open this one, you can see all these keywords which you cannot use as a class name. Constants as well. We have predefined classes. So feel free obviously to explore all these links and check which ones you shouldn't be basically using as your class name. And then a valid class name starts with a letter or underscore, followed by any number of letters, numbers, or underscores. So things like hyphen, for instance, you wouldn't be able to use in the name of the class, apostrophes or anything like this. So it's just numbers, letters, numbers, and underscores. A class may contain its own constants, variables, which are called properties, and functions, which are called methods. And then we have a simple example of a class. Now, as you can see, we're using this variable, and it is a pseudo variable and is available when a method is called from within an object context. It's not just a method, it's properties as well. As you can see here, we are referring to the property, which is like a class variable, using this pseudo variable. It is a reference to the calling object. So basically, when you're using this, you refer to this class. And then you can call any property or a method within this specific class. We will cover this in just a moment. Usually the object to which the method belongs, but possibly another object if a method is called statically from the context of a second object. And then we've got another example. If I scroll down a little bit more. New. To create an instance of a class, the new keyword must be used. An object will always be created unless the object has a constructor defined that throws an exception on error, and so on. We're going to stop right here because I don't want you to get too confused with all this content. Let's just go to our editor for the time being. And one thing before we actually go to the editor, I want to show you that I'm actually continuing from where we've left in the previous season. I have this subdomain, this virtual host here called phpcourse.dev. So whenever I hit this, it's going to go to my index.php file within the exercise files. There are no exercise files with this course. We're starting fresh with the empty directory. In that case, this directory is on my desktop and it's called PHP course. And then I have this index.php, which, as you can see here, is completely blank. It only has the opening PHP tag. Now, I continue using mump as well for my virtual host. So if you follow from the previous series, just remove the files which you've created in the previous one, and we're going to start with an empty index.php. So the first thing I want to do within my index.php is to create an instance of a new person class, basically creating a new person object. But we don't have this class yet. So let's quickly create a new directory. The directory name, let's call it src. And within this directory, I'm going to create a new class called person. And don't worry if you don't have the option to create class. Simply create a new PHP file called person with a capital letter P, and then obviously .php extension. And within this file, create the opening PHP tag, then class, keyword, space, name of the class, in our case person, and on a new line, create the opening and closing curly braces, basically. And this is our basic class definition. Within this class, what I'm going to do first is to create the public property called first name. So I'm starting with a $sign after the public keyword, space, and then $sign first underscore name. And then semicolon. We're just declaring these properties at the moment. Then we have public last name. After this, we are going to have public email. After this, we'll have public telephone. And the last thing we're going to have is going to be a public address. And let's now go, if we save everything, we go back to our index.php. First thing we need to do in order to have access to this class, we need to require this class from within our index.php. So what I need to do is simply use require once in this case, without the brackets or without with brackets, entirely up to you. I'm going to use without brackets, just in between the double or single quotes. I'm going to use double, just the path to this person.php class. So source and then person.php. So now we have access to this person class. Next thing I want to do is to instantiate this class. As you may remember from the previous video, in order to instantiate the class, we need to use this new keyword. So we start with the variable person, which will store the instance of this class. In other words, it's going to be an object. So we have person equals and then new person. And there we go. We can leave the brackets, but in this case, I'm just going to remove them because I don't have any constructor, and we will discuss constructors pretty soon. For the time being, I'm just not going to use any brackets after the name of the class, but it's entirely up to you. It's not wrong in any way if you want to leave them. Okay, so we've got an instance of this person class. We have this person object. Now what I want to do is associate some values with its properties. First one, first name. And now when we're using any variables or methods on the given object, as you may remember, using this arrow symbol, which is basically hyphen and greater or more than symbol. And then we basically use the equals symbol to associate the value with it, and in our case it's going to be a string Sebastian. Obviously feel free to use your name or somebody else's, it's entirely up to you. Then next one will be person, and for the last name I'm going to use my last name. Then we are going to have person email will be info@ssdtutorials.com. Then we have person telephone, and let's just put some fake telephone, 0800 for instance, space 800 space 800. So now our object has properties with the values. So what I can do now is simply echo, say, person first name. And again, to retrieve values associated with the properties and methods, we also use exactly same approach. So it's basically this arrow symbol after the object name, in our case this variable here, person, and obviously the name of the property or method. So if we save this and preview everything in the browser, if I refresh the page, there we go, and we have my first name. So we've retrieved the value associated with this first name property. If we change it to last name, it's going to obviously give us the last name, and so on. I'm pretty sure you already kind of guessed what's going to happen if I do email and telephone number. So let's just go back. Now, it would be nice to have something that, for instance, if I would like to have a full name, rather than concatenating these two together this way, echo person first name, then concatenated with a space and then last name, it would be nice to have some method which actually does this behind the scenes, and I don't have to worry about this concatenation. If I want to concatenate it in any other way after all, then I can just do it directly from the class, and that will automatically be reflected wherever I'm actually using this method. So let's go back to the person class, and let's create a public function called full name. And within this method, because it's a method inside of the classes, functions are called methods, we are going to return this first name concatenated with a space, and then concatenating this with this last name. If we save it, go back to our index.php, now rather than retrieving the full name this way, we are simply going to use this full name method. And now methods contain this brackets, set of brackets after the method name. So remember about this. Properties don't, but methods, when you call methods, it's like a function basically, so you need these brackets at the end. Okay, if we save it, go back to the browser, refresh the page, and there we go, my full name is being displayed. If I now want to change it to basically be done in any other way, let's say I want to use hyphen in between the first and last name, I just change it within the method, and if I use this method in several places within my project, this will automatically be reflected in all these places. So if we go back, refresh the page, and there we go. You can see that obviously the hyphen is now the concatenator for this full name method. Okay, I'm going to remove it because that's not quite what I need. Okay, next thing, we have email and we have telephone. What can we do with this? Very often on your website, you might want the email and telephone to be clickable. Let's say on mobile telephone, you would like to be able to click the telephone number and automatically start calling. On the same would be with email, which opens your mail client. So let's create methods which will take care of it. So the method name will be public function called email link, for instance. And I'm just going to create a few new lines here. And this email link will start, we're going to start with a variable called out. You can call it whatever you want. I just tend to use out for some strange reason. And in between a single quotes, we start with the A tag, then href, double opening, double quote, and then semicolon. We're going to concatenate it with our self. Actually, before we go any further, one other thing, I wanted to show you how you can also use constants in this video. So as I've mentioned earlier, you can use constants within the classes as well. So in order to declare the constant, we use const keyword, C-O-N-S-T keyword, and then the name of the constant. Same rule applies as to declaring any standard constants, which means capital letters and underscores. So href, let's call it href email, for instance. And for this one, we are going to be using mail to, which is the keyword I used for the href attribute. And then we're going to create another one, constant href underscore tel for telephone, and this one will use tel. And if we now scroll down, let's now use this constant. In order to use the constant from within the class in which this constant, to which this constant belongs, we use the keyword self followed by 2 colons, and then we can use the name of the constant. In this case, it's going to be href email because we are declaring the method email link, and we want to be able to, when we click on this, to open the email client. So we have this href email. So remember, self, 2 colons, and then the name of the constant. After this, we are going to concatenate it with the, in between a single quote, closing double quote, single one, because we want to close this href attribute, and then closing angle, greater than symbol, basically right angle bracket, and semicolon. Actually, before we do this, that's not quite what we should be doing. Let's just go back and create another out variable here. What we need to do is, after this, in between a single quote, colon, then we are going on to another one, another line, and here we are going to put this email. We want to fetch the value associated with the property email. So we have this mail to colon email address, and all that goes for this href attribute. Okay, so we have the first part of the A anchor tag. Then we are going to put in between the opening closing anchor tag, we are going to put this email as well, and then we will close it. So closing anchor tag, and then return out. So if we save it, go back to the index, and now what I want to do is use email link method. Let's see what we're going to get. Refresh the page, and there we go. You can see that we've got this email link, and if you check at the bottom here, when I'm mouse hovering, you'll see that it displays mail to colon and then email address, which is associated with this email property of the person object. So the email method works fine. Let's now go back to the editor and create the telephone link method. So we start with the public function telephone link. And what I'm going to do is, rather than typing all this again, I'm just going to copy the entire content of this email link and simply replace this href email with href tel, because we're referring to this href tel constant. And then rather than email, what I'm going to do is replace it with the telephone property, because this is the value that we actually want for this specific link. And now I'm going to copy the name of the method, go back to our index.php, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep this email link, basically call here to this method, and then I'm going to concatenate this with the new line. So in the browser, we're going to have this new method, this next method on the new line, and then echo person, and this time we're calling this telephone link method. If I save it, preview everything in the browser, at the top we have our email link, and at the bottom we have our telephone link. You can see that when I mouse over this telephone, you can see it's got tel, colon, and then the number of the telephone. The only problem with this is that this tel property of the href attribute should not contain any spaces. So let's quickly go back to the editor and amend our method accordingly. What we are going to do here for this href attribute, after the colon, what I'm going to do is simply use string replace function, not repeat, replace, there we go. And what I'm going to do is search for spaces, replace them with an empty string without any spaces, and the subject is our telephone line. So now it should take this telephone, search for any spaces, remove them, and that should now work just fine. So if we go back, refresh the page, if I mouse over now, you can see the telephone number right here in the bottom corner does not have any spaces. So that's it in this video. If we go back to the editor, in the next video, we are going to have a look at this address property and learn how we can actually associate the existing object with the property of another object.